Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Well Enough Presents Mental Health. This is the virtual launch of Random House's Well Enough series, and we are so excited for tonight's conversation on a topic that is so important right now, mental health and self-care. During this evening's event, we will be utilizing the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please feel free to ask it here, and Rachel might just pull the question into the conversation. Please connect with other readers and guests using the chat function. We'd love to hear your thoughts, what you're reading, and how you are taking care of yourself during this difficult time. We just ask that everyone please stay respectful in the chat. Random House will also be providing the link to each of our panelists' books that are currently for sale. You can find that in the chat. This event will be posted on YouTube, and we will send that link out to all guests in case you would like to rewatch or share with friends and family. Now, I am honored to introduce our moderator for this evening, Rachel Cargle. Rachel is a writer, academic, and activist. She is the founder of the Loveland Foundation, which raises money and provides support for Black women seeking therapy. She has just started facilitating The Great Unlearn, a learning platform through Patreon that creates resources and critical discourse to aid in unlearning. You can find her every day reading kids' books live on her Instagram page at 3 p.m. Eastern. And her book, I Don't Want Your Love and Light, will be available in 2021, so be sure to be on the lookout. We will link to Rachel's foundation, her course, and Instagram in the chat feature as well. And now, may I present Rachel Cargle and Well Enough Mental Health.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much to Penguin Random House for having me be part of this conversation. This is so incredibly critical, and I think that once we hear from all of the incredible panelists, we'll really get more of our head wrapped around what we're all experiencing and how best to approach this new virtual existence that we're kind of having in the world. So I'm excited to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Celeste Headlee, and I'm going to read her bio for you. Celeste is an award-winning journalist and professional speaker and is the best-selling author of We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matter. She is co-host of the New York weekly series Retro Report on PBS and season 3 of the Scene on Radio podcast Men. Celeste serves as an advisory board member for ProCon and the Listen First podcast. In her 20-year career in public radio, Celeste has been the executive producer of On Second Thought at Georgia Public Radio and has anchored programs including Tell Me More, Talk of the Nation, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. She also co-hosted the national morning news show.
Misleading because in the Hungry Ghost realm, you definitely cannot.
If you could pause, someone is not on mute. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Okay, I apologize. We're going back. I'm sorry, Celeste. I'm going to go back to talk about all of your PBS and your NPR programming. So Tell Me More, Talk of the Nation, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. She also co-hosted for PRI and WNYC, anchored World Channel's presidential coverage in 2012, and received the 2019 Media Changemaker Award. Celeste is coming to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Celeste, for being here.
So glad to be here.
All right, let's go to our next panelist, Tara Schuster. She is the Vice President of Talent and Development at Comedy Central. She is the executive in charge of Lights Out with David Spade and was the executive in charge of the Emmy and Peabody Award-winning Key and Peele and the Emmy Award-winning Midnight. Her numerous other shows include Another Period, Not Safe with Nikki Glaser, and Hood Adjacent. Her plays have been performed in the New York International Fringe Festival, and her writing has appeared in the New Yorker Online. She is joining us from Los Angeles. Hi, Tara.
Hi, Rachel.
Thank you so much for being here. All right, now to introduce our final panelist, Corinne Sweet. She is an author, psychologist, and psychotherapist. She regularly writes for magazines and newspapers and has published more than 14 books, including several bestsellers. She regularly appears on TV, radio, and online, offering expert insight as a psychologist spokesperson. Corinne, are you here?
I am. I'm
Wonderful. Okay, we are all here. And so I want to just dive into the questions because I know our audience is so excited to hear from all of you. So I'm going to just start a little bit to talk about something that's close to my heart in this conversation, with my work being at the intersection of race and womanhood in particular, looking at the ways that this epidemic isn't just showing us what's is going on right now, but it's highlighting a lot of the disparities that have been going on for a long while across a variety of spaces, from mental health care to medical health care in the hospitals and things of that sort. And so I just wanted to take a moment to speak on that and just push the things like maternal mortality and the ways that hospitals have been proven to have racial bias. And that's the reason why there are these disparities. There's been research that's done that has nothing to do with insurance, has nothing to do with education level or what hospital you may or may not be. It's purely racial bias that is showing up in these spaces. So I'm really hoping that the audience and the people who are part of this conversation and really considering how this pandemic is affecting each of our lives, we look at the marginalized groups and how it's not only turning us all upside down and on our heads, that this is really bringing out a ton of the disparities that this country already has to deal with. And mental health is absolutely one of them. It's the reason why I started my foundation, the Loveland Foundation, where we offer payment. We cover the complete cost of as many mental therapy sessions as we can for Black women and girls. And so I'm interested, something that we're all experiencing across the board, regardless who you are, what you look like, what you're experiencing, this anxiety that's kind of gripping all of us. And I think that one of the biggest parts of the anxiety is us just not knowing what's going to happen. We truly have no clue. None of us have lived through this. So Corinne, I'd love to hear from you about how all of us, people who maybe never had anxiety are actually experiencing it right now, and people who have had it are having it heightened. Are there any opportunities at all to alchemize the situation and what we're experiencing?
Well, thank you for your wonderful introduction there. I think that anxiety is a very important human state. Through being anxious, we survive. And in fact, often the most anxious people are the people that survive the best. There comes a point when your anxiety tips over and it becomes too much. And that's when we become very nervous, we can get depressed, we can burn out. In this current situation, it's very easy, if you're an anxious person, to start catastrophizing. And that means you really think, oh my God, this is going on forever, it'll never end, it's all terrible, it's all disastrous. And you can go into a downward spiral where you just feel completely dreadful. So one of the things I try and do with people is I try and get them to minimize the catastrophizing. So in other words, try and get it into a smaller perspective. Yes, we are in a really difficult situation. I'm not denying that. But I think for each of us, we have to kind of limit what we can cope with so we don't get overwhelmed. And the biggest thing, there are several things you can do. One is to break it down into bite-sized chunks and just work on how you are today and in the next hour and maybe in the next 5 minutes, and just not think, oh my goodness, this is going on for 6 months or a year and all this disaster. And secondly, get yourself support, get yourself to be grounded in some way through meditation or some exercise or just looking at the sky for about 3 seconds. But what we have to do is understand that anxiety is part of our hard wiring as human beings. It's what keeps us alive. We do the fight, flight or freeze when we're under pressure. And one of the problems with stress and anxiety and the situation that we're all living through, and as you've said clearly, some people are living, with more anxiety than others, is that we end up feeling completely stressed and overboiled the whole time. And to do that, we have to get hold of ourselves and begin to take some steps towards breathing, calming down, and reducing catastrophizing.
I love that so much, to recognize what we need, to really consider for ourselves what will help us in the next 5 minutes, the next hour, the next 24 hours. I love just checking in with yourself and just saying, okay, what do I need in this moment, and honoring yourself in that way. Tara, I'd love to hear from you, because one of the things that's showing up, this is the first pandemic in human history in which we have social media. And so I'm interested to hear from you. We're seeing so many people really put on display how, we were always putting our lives on display within the social media world, but now we're kind of peeking in and seeing how each of us are dealing with this experience. Can you kind of speak to the way that social media is showing up in this moment?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question because it's very top of mind for me as somebody who's scrolling through Instagram pretty frequently. You know, there's no right way to do a pandemic. And that's what I kind of want to remind everyone. And to what you just said, this is the first time, you know, in my lifetime where there's, and many other, basically, if you weren't alive in 1918, this is the first time we're going through a full stop in a pandemic. So to think that there's some way you should be able to handle this is ridiculous. And so when I look on Instagram and I see people baking bread and they've picked up a new yoga practice and, oh my God, I started a new small business. I'm like, great. That's great if that's your reaction. But if your reaction is, I'm having trouble going to bed at a consistent time, I'm having trouble waking up, I don't want to get dressed, I can only watch reruns of The Office, that's okay too. And I think that's kind of what we have to remember right now is there's no one way we should feel, and there's not one way we should react. And that we really, if anything, I hope we can offer some gentleness to ourselves and say, how I'm actually feeling, that's worth dealing with. The writer Lori Gottlieb talks about this idea of a hierarchy of pain. And I think people often dismiss their real life lived experience because they think they shouldn't have it. You know, they shouldn't feel this way. I'm not going through the worst. And so then they just ignore how they feel. They do themselves a great injustice and they're really mean to each other or to themselves. And what I'd say is, however you're actually feeling, let's deal with that. You know, forget about the shoulds, forget about your friends who are baking bread. How do you actually feel? And what would you like to do about that? Because I think we have a lot more power over our attitude and how we see a situation. To what Corinne was saying, we have some power not to get completely overwhelmed and burdened by our emotions. We have some power to choose the attitude that we treat any situation from, you know, people dealing with layoffs and their health. That's obviously really stressful and difficult. But if you're also dealing with your wedding being canceled or something you had been looking forward to for years and working for years being canceled because of it, all that pain, nobody's above one another in pain.
I love that. And I think that is such a perfect match to what Corinne was saying, that you have to like really pay attention to ourselves and what we need, really keeping a beat on who we are and what we know about ourselves and how we're showing up. I really appreciate that. Celeste, I'd love to hear from you, because one thing that this is really bringing up that has always been somewhat of a stressor in conversation in everyone's lives is this work-life balance. And now the concept of work and the concept of life are completely different, and we're still trying to balance it. So I'd love to hear from you to kind of, what is this looking like? What is this feeling like? How are people showing up, and how can we establish these boundaries while we're doing all of this virtually?
So let me walk through this. The first problem comes because we have become so identified, our entire identities have become our work in many places, that for many people this calls up an existential crisis, because when you are not working and your work is what gives you value, that can make people feel worthless. It can make them feel completely at sea. The other thing is that we have designed our lives to sort of eliminate everything that we think is not efficient, or things that don't leverage our brand or build our CV. And so we've eliminated all those hobbies and little pastimes that we used to do all the time. Some people don't even have a deck of cards in their home anymore, right? Like, people used to collect stamps. Can you believe that? People used to do all kinds of stuff that was worthless. And so now they're at home all the time and find there's nothing in there that's not connected to work. And so they're finding they have nothing to do. So that's the first thing, is to find out who you are when you're not working. Who are you when you're not at your job? That's the first task, is figure out what you like to do that's not productive or valuable. The other thing is, when you're talking about this work-life balance, it was already horribly blurred, that boundary between life and work, before this pandemic, and now it is just completely bled over the lines. There are a few very tangible things you can do. First of all, resist the temptation to just take your laptop and work with it all over your house. There's a reason why sleep doctors tell you that if you're having trouble sleeping, do nothing in your bed except sleep. Don't check your phone, don't do other work, do nothing, because they want your bed to be associated with sleep. So we want your house to be associated with living, your personal life. So take your laptop. If you need to create a fort like you did when you were 9, make a place for yourself that is for work. And when you have to take a work call, you go to that place. When the work call's over, you leave and you're back to your regular life. Another thing I would say is find time to walk away from your screens. And this is really important, because when we get anxious and wound up, sometimes we take a break. I'm sorry to be using so many air quotes, they're obnoxious, but I need to make sure you understand I'm kidding. Take a break by like scrolling through our Instagram feeds or looking through Facebook or Twitter really fast. The problem is that cognitively speaking, inside your brain, there is no distinction, or almost no distinction, between scrolling through Instagram and working. So if that's how you're spending your time on your break, you have literally spent the entire day working. If you're watching Netflix and you're also looking through Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, as far as your brain is concerned, now you're trying to multitask, which is incredibly stressful, but you're also working. So if you really need to take a break, you need to set the screens down, and it's okay. You will survive for 15 minutes. The iPhone only came out in 2007. You will be okay. We can live without your phone.
Celeste, I'd love to hear from you really quickly. You were part of an article from Salon that discussed how our brains are really, and you kind of touched on it, how our brains aren't able to tell when we're scrolling Instagram and when we're on a business call via Zoom. Can you kind of talk about kind of what you discussed in that article and how it's showing up for us in our minds, and then we'll move on to Corinne to kind of show us how that's happening with our psyche and how it's showing up in that anxiety.
Yeah, that's great, because authentic social conversation, sorry if you hear my dog barking, I am at home. Authentic human connection is almost always going to be healing for you. It's almost always going to lower your cortisol levels. It's almost always going to lower your heart rate. We are biologically and evolutionarily designed to take benefit from that in almost all cases. Teleconferencing is almost as good as being in person with someone else when it comes to the physiological markers and the lowering of stress. But here's the caveat. When it comes to Zoom meetings, there's a couple things that are occurring that make it different from a regular social interaction. Number one, usually you're doing it on the exact same machine that you use to do your work, which again is going to make that social connection somehow bleed over into your work. And here's the other thing. Most people don't just have Zoom open. Most people also have their cell phone sitting right next to them. They also keep their email inbox open and about 14 tabs on their inbox. And here's how that works inside your brain in the area of neuroscience. Every time you leave your email inbox open, we know from research, your brain thinks you're trying to multitask. In other words, your brain is thinking about that email inbox the entire time and preparing to respond to an incoming email. And they found that this is so stressful and exhausting to your brain that if you do that, if you keep your email inbox open all the time, your IQ lowers by 10 to 12 points. That's how stressful it is. So it is no surprise to me that with all the Zoom meetings going on, people are getting exhausted, even though social connection is good for you. So my suggestion is, A, close out all your other tabs if you need to do a Zoom meeting. B, try just the phone. It doesn't have to be a video call, you know. That social connection can happen through the phone, and you can find all other kinds of ways to do it as well during this pandemic. It doesn't have to be the ideal. You can also send a letter. You can also do all other kinds of ways to connect with people that you care about if Zoom or whatever your teleconference is stressing you out.
So essentially, we're having this virtual social burnout, the same burnout that we were having in real life, where we're going back and forth, running around, trying to fit ourselves into all of these spaces. We've simply moved it over to be completely virtually. Corinne, could you speak to how this type of parallel between our normal lives and now this new pandemic life, how is that showing up in terms of anxiety here?
Well, it's very interesting. It's wonderful to hear all this knowledge and wisdom, because I think we've, over the last 25 years, the kind of fear of missing out has just got faster and faster and wider and broader. And I think now in the pandemic, a lot of my clients have said to me, they just can't turn off their machines. They're constantly checking everything. They feel inundated with WhatsApps and everything, and they just feel they can't turn off for a second. And yet at the same time, people are learning a little bit more horizontal connection, like writing a letter, like simply picking up the telephone, like turning everything off and just being quiet for a moment. And I think that social anxiety, interestingly, a lot of my clients feel actually happier at the moment with less contact and with some restriction on movement, and some shutdown actually makes highly anxious people feel safer, oddly, because you're not going on the street and all sorts of things. At the same time, the other side of social anxiety is if I'm not online the whole time on all my devices, 24 hours, I'm gonna miss out. And now everybody somehow is popping up like mushrooms. They've got new careers. Oh my goodness, I can't miss a moment of anything. And there's all these box sets and all these things I haven't done. Why don't I have a YouTube channel? And suddenly everybody's cooking and showing you how they clean their toilet. And you suddenly think, my goodness, I'm missing out again. So I've got to do even more. So I think we have to learn, and rather, as Tara was saying earlier, we have to make the relationship primarily with ourselves, and we have to be able to slow down, because actually part of this pandemic is giving us a chance to get to know who we are and who we are on our own. And that, I think, is actually the big prize here, to find out that you can survive on your own, you can be on your own, you can actually enjoy your own company, you can talk to yourself, just like I always have, but actually it's fine to begin to be just you, and you can turn off. And I would totally agree with Celeste about what you need to do for sleep. So all of us have got to be able to turn off, calm down, slow down, and not let the social anxiety bite at your heels and make you feel the whole time you're missing out. Actually, it's fine to turn off and do some knitting or paint your toenails or just go to sleep. It's fine.
Thank you so much. I completely agree. I love all of those examples. And I speak for myself when I say I recently moved from New York City to Ohio, and I have a lot more green things to look at than I did in New York. And one of my favorite things that I've been doing, since there's no where to go, is that I've really been enjoying just sitting on my patio and seeing which animals come by, and like journaling, like, oh, today I saw a rabbit, and then these two birds seem to be having a wonderful conversation. And it's been both a writing prompt for me as a writer, but also just indulging in my space. And that has really allowed me to take a pause, whether I do it in the morning before I start working, whether I take a break during work and kind of just sit out there and sip some tea. I'm interested to hear from you all. What have you been doing to kind of exist during this pandemic? I'd love to hear some suggestions. So maybe the people who are watching might be able to take some notes and include it in their schedules if it serves them. Tara?
Yeah, one of the things that I write about in my book in particular is I am not an athlete. I am the least athletic person. I was the girl who like miserably ran the mile in the concrete parking lot of my middle school in my tights, in a gabardine uniform and saddle shoes. Non-athlete. But what I've found in this kind of self-care journey is that exercise, sweating, feeling out of breath is the number one anti-anxiety medication that I have. When it was first suggested to me that running might soothe my anxiety, I was so angry at the person who suggested it, I was like dropping F-bombs, angry, like, how dare you? My anxiety is so great. My burden so strong. Like, running's not going to work. Let me tell you something. Running works. And I think, you know, in this pandemic, I have a narrative of I'm not an athlete. So I decided, well, what if I wrote a news story? Like, what if I could run a 10K? I can run 5 miles. I bet I could do a 10K. And so what I'm trying to do is I downloaded on the Nike app, the running club. It's holding me accountable to do these running exercises. And even if I don't achieve each one, I'm practicing. I'm getting into a habit. And that's the only way you build any good habit for your life is by trying. And it's okay if you don't nail it every single time. So I would say that finding some way to exercise, even if it's 12 minutes while your baby takes a nap, like even if it's like the smallest little amount of time, I think that really helps reduce anxiety.
Thank you. I love that. Just a little bit of time of getting your heart rate up. It really does change the energy in your whole body and really help you breathe, which you have to do when you're moving around. So it's so wonderful. Celeste, what have you been up to?
Yeah, and just heading on to Tara, it doesn't have to be running. I have genetic arthritis. You can find another way to get your heart rate up. My dog has been getting more walks than she wants. One thing that I have done, and this is also comes straight out of the research that I ended up doing for my book, which very much convinced me. And I should say, going in, I've been a journalist for over 2 decades. I'm about as cynical as you could possibly be. Nobody calls me, naive. But the one thing I have been doing is doing nice stuff for other people. Because this whole pandemic, I'm not sick. Very thankfully, no one in my family is sick, but financially and in terms of business, it's been totally devastating. And I think that if I were to focus on that, I could spiral. So what I started doing almost immediately was trying to imagine other people either in my life or near me who were probably going through worse anxiety than me. And then reaching out and asking if I could do something for them. I read an article in the New York Times about first generation students in college who are struggling because they don't have computers to do their work online, and then all the libraries are shut down. So I contacted the reporter and said, can I buy this kid in your report a laptop? And I bought him a laptop, and he's doing his schoolwork now. And I send out handwritten cards to my relatives, and I go grocery shopping for other people. And I got to tell you again, this is not coming from some pie in the sky, flowers in my hair person. It really helps you. I can tell you all the research to back it up, but let me tell you something, focusing on what other people are going through and how it makes you feel empowered. Because right now we're so disempowered. We feel like so much is out of our control and the news is so horrible. Shut off the news, check it once or twice a day and do something for someone else, because it makes you feel like you do still have some control over what's going on around you.
Yeah, and there's Celeste, to speak to that, looking to the news for those good stories, that if we do go into, if we do decide to scroll, to not just, to have a balance in what we're reading. There's so many good stories that are coming out of this, the ways people and organizations are showing up, the way people are showing up for each other individually, or even getting news from your family and friends. Hey, what good has been going on? Let's all tap into each other. So balancing that good news with the news of everything that's going on is such a great suggestion. Corinne, I'd love to hear what you've been doing.
Well, I love gardening, and I'm in London, in the north of London, and I have a garden, and I planted just one pack. I had one pack of seeds because all the garden centres are closed, and I have made 200 little plants out of these seeds. And today, my rest time today was actually putting all these little seedlings into pots, and it gave me so much joy. The other thing is I sing in a choir, and we're trying to meet and sing, and we're all out of time, but it doesn't matter because it's just fun and we don't care. And the other thing is I work as a psychotherapist, so I'm seeing about 22 people a week on Zoom, and I am really, even on the days when I feel really low and I feel really fed up and I feel, oh my goodness, let me out of here, the minute I spend time with a client, actually it's exactly what was just being said. It lifts my heart, and nearly all my clients are crying, and I'm crying with them, frankly, because it's that human contact, even if it's through a screen. It really does make a difference to feel that I'm making a difference, and my clients are helping me as much as I'm helping them. It is a two-way process. And I'm also just enjoying my cats, who always talk to me anyway, and they're my muse, my writing muse. And they're coming into my sessions even though I put bricks against the door. So my clients are enjoying the cats as well. They pop up like this and the clients are enjoying it. So I don't know, it feels like we're in a very strange time, but things are a bit more relaxed. And I think it's time to experiment and try new things.
That's such a great segue into the next question that I have, and I'd love to possibly hear from Celeste if you might have some insight into this, and Tara as well, from the things that you've written in your book. But we're getting really murky sometimes on the difference between self-care and doing nothing. And one thing that I recognize is, as Corinne said, she's been gardening, but for a gardener, that's work, and that might not be considered what's restful to them. So I'd love to hear from you all about what this line is between self-care and actually resting, and what resting looks like. Because like I said, some people gardening might be resting, and for some people writing might be, and for me it's not. So I'm wondering to hear from you all, what is this murky space of self-care and doing nothing, and how are we navigating this as a culture and as just community, and how we're existing with each other?
I'll jump in here because, frankly, if we all had gigantic functional magnetic resonance imaging machines in our living rooms, it wouldn't be a murky line. We know when the brain is resting because it goes into what's called the default mode network. In the simplest terms possible, this means you're not directing your mind, right? You're not focusing your mind on accomplishing a task. So I'll give you an example. There's a difference between analytical thinking and insightful thinking, right? Analytical thinking is what we use to solve tangible problems. If you have a deadline, your analytical brain is going to come into play. If you have a math problem to solve, your analytical mind is going to come into play. But let's say that you have a rebus problem or any kind of creative problem that you need to solve. If you get a deadline, or even if you get an incentive, if someone says, hey, I'll give you $20 to solve this problem, we know through decades of research that you will have a harder time solving that problem. Why? Because those sort of tangible, measurable markers mean that our analytical mind has come to play and our creative mind is not working. We're not getting the flashes of insight that we need. We're not having the flashes of inspiration that we need. You need to be able to let your brain wander if you're going to have a flash of insight, if you want an aha moment. And if gardening makes you focused, if it makes you feel as if you're trying to meet a target or a goal, then that's your analytical mind at work. It means you're focused on a task. It means you're not actually relaxing. If, however, gardening is just something that you do, which it sounds like Corinne is doing, relaxing with her seedlings, then probably she does some of her best thinking when she's doing gardening, because her brain is allowed to wander. It sifts through the archives. It looks through the memories you've had, the things that you've learned recently. It makes surprising connections. It thinks, oh, I haven't talked to this person in a really long time. Oh, I wanted to get this done the other day. Things will bubble up. That's how you know that your mind is at rest. And that is the most healthy state of brain, for you, is when you alternate persist and pulse, work and leisure, work and leisure.
Tara, I'm interested to follow up with that, recognizing, again, I love that this comes back to knowing ourselves, to really, this is forcing us to pay attention to ourselves and what we need, and hopefully this will show up in other ways as well. And Tara, in this conversation of this like productivity push, as someone who is on Instagram often also, this idea of, like you said, oh, this person made 12 loaves of bread, and this person started 3 more businesses, and this person's kids all still look clean after playing outside all day with the, made up game that this mother has been able to come up with out of the blue. So I'm interested to hear from you. What can you speak to those people who are just sitting under the weight of what this productivity expectation is?
I'm so happy that you asked this question because it's something that I've really been considering right now. And it connects to something you were saying at the very beginning about how this is kind of illuminating other systems that we didn't even know were at work. And for me, what it's really illuminated is, when did my self-worth, and this connects to something Celeste said too, when did my self-worth become completely tied to my output, to what I put out, to my work? When did I become a cog in a machine that is only responsible for making stuff? And I think there's a really powerful invitation here to question that and to step back and to say, you know, remember in pre-pandemic times when we were all too busy, when we couldn't have drinks with friends because we were too busy going to a conference to do this, or, you know, whatever work we had. I feel we have been stuck in the too busy cycle for way too long, to the point where busy has come to mean important. And busy doesn't mean important. It doesn't mean esteemed. It doesn't mean courageous or generous. It generally means you're distracted and running like a million different ways. So I think the invitation here is to ask ourselves, well, what does really matter? Is productivity have to be, you know, a lot of people are feeling guilt, like I'm not productive. Instead of guilting and shaming yourself about how not productive you are, I think it would actually be, to use the word, very productive to question, what do I want to be? What are the things that I would like to be true about myself? What principles do I actually hold in esteem and value? And to sort of like flip this whole thing on its head, if you're asking, why can't I be more productive? I'd ask, why are you so tied to needing to be productive in a pandemic?
Yeah, I absolutely love the conversation that we are not what we produce, and we're allowed to just exist, that we have value just by being. Celeste, yes.
I just wanted to say quickly that one person reported that they went to their therapist and said, I feel guilty all the time. I'm fatigued, I'm exhausted, but then I sit down and I'm there for like an hour, and an hour goes by and I have done nothing. And I know that if I need to get busy, I need to make a list, because during this pandemic, you either sink or swim. And her therapist said, couldn't you just float? And we make up these sort of dichotomies in our brains. I was talking to somebody who was like, well, I'm trying to figure out how to make a scone from scratch. And I was like, here, I've got a mix. It tastes exactly the same as anything you're going to make from scratch. And they're like, no, I don't make from mixes. And I was like, are you on Top Chef? Like, why are you making this hard for yourself? This mix tastes delicious. Why would you make it from scratch? I'm a very good cook. I understand the benefits of making things from scratch, but sometimes we complicate things for ourselves for no purpose. I can have the mix and be eating scones in 20 minutes. We don't need to make things more difficult for ourselves. I think, I can't remember which one, either of my other esteemed panelists said it early on, but we have to be a little gentler with ourselves. And compassion for the world starts with compassion for yourself.
I completely agree. Corinne?
I was going to say that I think in the rush of the last 25 to 30 years, as we've got faster and faster and faster and more distracted and more completely, I think we're screen agers, you know, we're just completely obsessed with screen. We've just lost sight of being. We've just lost sight of today. We've just lost sight of simply being in the moment. So what I see in all my clients talking about anxiety, you know, why mindfulness? I know it sounds like, oh gosh, mindfulness everywhere, we know about all this stuff, but the big challenge to us is to be in the now, to be here, to be present, to not constantly be thinking about the future or worrying about the past. And I think one of the things the pandemic is giving us, if we want to alchemize, as you said right in the beginning, Rachel, we can say the pandemic has come upon us and is here, and we don't know. The uncertainty of it is a gift in a funny sort of way, because all you can be is in today and the moment and right now. Because when nobody knows anything, nobody knows anything. So you have to just get used to living for today. And then, as Celeste is saying, about being the lily floating on the pond, we're allowed, you're entitled to be a human being, to breathe, to look at the sky, to stroke a cat, to pick your nose, to do whatever it is you want to do. And this productivity addiction, I think we get on the addictive treadmill of trying to prove that we're worth something. And in the end, we become worthless in the whole process of it. And we kill ourselves with our addictions. So actually, we have to just be.
This is such another great example of the ways that this is really highlighting so many things that are wrong with our society, in the way that we have placed ourselves in a position to feel like we're only worth what we output. And I just have to do a shameless plug of the Instagram page called The Nap Ministry that has been doing this work, this anti-capitalism work, and this, and they often say rest is the revolution. And we have to, if we want to build a revolution, we have to be rested to do it. So if someone in the chat could do the at the Nap Ministry so people know who to follow. I'm going to move into some questions from the people who are listening in. And so it's really open to anyone. But one of the first ones that I'm really interested to hear from you all is someone said, from looking at social media and talking to my friends, I feel like I'm the only one who's really angry about this situation. It seems everyone is trying to be super positive and in some respects enjoying this downtime. Am I really the only one who's angry and annoyed, and how do I deal with this feeling? I would love to speak to that and say, no, I too am angry. As someone who does social justice work, as someone who has been existing in these spaces, I'm livid about the way things are handled, about the way people of color are dying at disproportionate rates due to this in various cities, the way that our children haven't been taken care of in various ways in the school systems, the way that people are dying in hospitals without their loved ones, and they're delivering babies without their loved ones. So there are a million things to be upset about. And I think that that is part of the processing that we need to go through, of saying, what role do I play in the world, and how is this showing up? And I think it's another good thing that will come out of this, that we're going to be hyper aware of our privileges in various ways, whether it's racial privilege, financial privilege, geographical privilege, things like that. But I too have been incredibly angry, and I've seen a lot of people using this opportunity to say, I will not stand for this. The world will not be the same on the other side of this, because now I see very clearly what's happening, and I refuse to go back to the way things were. I think a lot of times we're sitting around saying, oh, I can't wait till things get back to the way things were. And some of us who are very aware that it should have never been that way anyways. We should have never been told that our productivity is where our value is. Black women should never have been dying at higher rates. Our children should have always had what they needed. Our children shouldn't be not eating lunch because they're not in school. So things like this that are coming up, I too am angry. And I just want to offer the phrase spiritual bypassing. Someone mentions toxic positivity. These are the things that are coming up in this conversation. And I realize I totally answered that question, so I'm going to ask another one. But that spoke to so much. Does anyone else want to speak on that?
I would just add to the person who asked the question that, good, I'm glad you're angry. I'm glad that you're feeling your feelings and you aren't repressing them. Go down to the basement. I don't want to feel this right now. Mm-hmm. The only way that, to what Rachel was talking about, that on the other side of this, we grow, which, right, is the invitation here, is to grow, is that we deal with how we actually feel. And I think there's such a veneer on social media. People are just projecting what they want to be true. That we know that's just fiction anyway. So I think it's powerful and vulnerable of you just to admit, I feel angry. And now the question is, how will you channel that anger, and what can it bring all of us? Because we need you. We need each other, and we need each other to show up and take ourselves seriously right now more than ever.
I totally agree with that. Just so everyone knows, I'm getting questions on my phone. Someone asked me to define spiritual bypassing. And spiritual bypassing, the best example that I give to this is, so in my work where I do my work at the intersection of race and womanhood, and often people say, Rachel, can you stop talking about race? It's only happening because you can't stop talking about it. That's the only reason it's showing up. And I choose love, and I choose light, and that's why I refuse to be a part of this conversation. And so the way that I explain spiritual bypassing is, when people say, hey, Rachel, stop I don't want to talk about racism. If you would stop talking about it, you wouldn't experience. I say, would you walk into an orphanage and tell all these babies, if you guys could just love a little harder, you might have a parent? Or would you walk into a homeless shelter and say, if you all would just choose love, the homes would be here? So spiritual bypassing is finding a spiritual way to look over systematic issues. So no, the issue isn't me talking about racism. The issue is that racism is systematically braided into our system and it can't be escaped unless the system changes. It's that the things that are happening, and the word homelessness isn't happening because people aren't being positive enough. Homelessness is happening because there's structural missteps. There's structure, actually, it's not even a misstep. It was intentionally built into the system, but me and Celeste will talk about that another time. But there's all these ways that we are trying to say that that people are not having experiences because they aren't being positive, but there's whole systems that are in place to make that happen. So that's what spiritual bypassing is. And you can definitely, I'm sure you've heard it when you brought up something, but it's when that positivity becomes toxic and they're dismissing actual realities due to their own personal spiritual decisions. I'm going to bring up another question. So people are looking for some tips from you all for how to get into that deep rest that you mentioned that we often need, and specifically for sleep. Celeste mentioned, letting your bedroom be the place that you sleep. Are there any other tips or tricks on how to get a deeper sleep or how to manage our lifestyle within our home in order to get rest? Corinne?
I've just written a book on sleep, actually, and self-care. I just finished it 3 weeks ago, just before the lockdown, and then I went to sleep. No, I didn't. Basically, I think there's a lot of things that you can do. And I mean, I'm sure Celeste will know a lot about the sort of neurophysiology about this, but you really do have to stop being on your screen at least an hour, probably 2 hours before you go to sleep. You need to make your bedroom a sanctity, a place of, I call mine a boudoir, but it has to be a place that you go to sleep, and you have to make it dark. You have to have a comfortable mattress. You have to declutter it if you can. And you have to have little rituals about sleep. You need to just do the same things. If you can, go to sleep at the same time if you can. We're very bad at sort of staying up very late and then telling ourselves, we can't sleep at certain times. So the more you can get into regular rituals, not eating and drinking late at night, not big meals and lots of drink. We call it in the UK a nightcap or a snifter to get to sleep. In fact, it wakes you up because you have to go to the loo in the night or the toilet or the bathroom or whatever you call it. So I think there's lots of things. You have to associate the bedroom with sleep. You have to make it dark. You have to make it quiet. You have to make it a haven of snoozing and not a workstation with lots of screens.
Celeste?
I'm sure that Tara will also say get exercise, because absolutely that is going to help you. I would say get used to doing a nighttime dump. One of the things that prevents people often from getting sleep is the racing mind, and especially in a time like this, when you're anxious and the times are fraught, you can be prevented from sleeping because your mind is racing. And the way that you help that is by just grabbing a piece of paper. It does not have to be a special journal unless it's an anxiety journal that you've purchased that will help. But it can just be a piece of paper or a notepad, and just write down all the things that need to get done. Write down the things you're worried about. Write down the things that you're afraid of. Write down the things that have gone well that day. One thing that we know that raises your serotonin levels is when you talk about stuff you're proud of. What are you proud of? I mean, everyone stop for just one moment and think, what am I proud of right now? What have I done recently that's made me feel proud? And call someone else and give them a chance to answer the very same question, because you'll raise their serotonin levels and make them feel awesome. So do a nighttime dump so that if nothing else, at least your brain won't sit there running like a hamster on a wheel. And the other thing I would say is choose your quitting time. Whatever your job is, whatever that time is. And again, we're talking about people with a certain amount of privilege who are A, still working, and B, able to work from home. That said, if you are one of those lucky few, choose the time when work ends. If it's 5 o'clock, you need to stick to it, just like it's a whistle blowing at the factory. That whistle blows, you leave that space, the fort that I told you to build, and you are back into your regular life and work ends.
Tara, did you want to add at all?
Yeah, I think that the setting of boundaries is kind of what we're talking about, you know, emotional, but also what do you do in your real physical life? And I'd say there's a real temptation right now to stay up all night binge watching the Tiger King on Netflix. There's a, you know, we want to be distracted, we want to be watching what everybody's watching, but if you're going to stay up till 1 a.m., I don't care. You need to wake up early at your consistent time that you were supposed to wake up at, because you will just keep messing with your sleep cycle. And what is more important than rest right now? Like, what will restore us? So I think really to what Corinne and Celeste were both saying is like, what time do you put all the screens away? Make it a real time, not a wish in your head that you wish you had a time, like 9:30. What time do you go to bed? What time do you wake up? Just like you would treat a small child, treat yourself, because we all need that structure, particularly now.
I love that analogy of treating yourself like a small child, both in structure and in love and in care and in softness and in saying, what do you need? How can I help you? How can I provide for you? I love that. I have chills thinking about how we often, even how we talk to children, you know, we get that voice. And I just thinking about, I recently did a writing prompt where I suggested everyone write a letter to your younger self, write a letter telling them, what are you proud of? What do you want to tell them about? What do you want to get them excited about that, you know, your older self now knows is going to happen soon? So maybe people could write a letter to their younger selves and saying, in this time, here's how I'm caring for you while you're in this adult body. And that might be a way to kind of connect and make those ways of how we're being soft and gentle and caring to ourselves in a way that we might have been to a child. Corinne?
I was going to add something there because these are all great ideas, and it was a bit more along the Celeste line of the brain dump. I suggest to people to get a piece of paper and draw a big bag on it and say, this is a big bag of worries. And you write down all your worries, which is different from the dump. The dump often can be planning things or things you want to remember the next day or something that's hurt you, but worries. And then you either can screw it up and put it in the bin, or you can put it under your pillow, or you can even shred it, but you just get rid of your worries. And I think in a time of anxiety, we need to get rid of our worries.
I love that. I have only 2 more questions. And the first one is that a lot of things that are coming up, I'm kind of consolidating a few questions that have been coming in, and so many of them are about guilt. And I know we kind of talked about the need to feel productive, which is along the lines of this, but one of the questions is, you know, I've been letting my 5-year-old just watch their iPad because I cannot deal with what they're doing and what I'm doing and what the other kids are, and they're really feeling guilty about that. We got a question from an educator saying that they're feeling guilty because a lot of their colleagues are saying, you know, now's our time to prove to the world that teachers can show up in every way. And they're like, well, I just need to exist as myself. And they're feeling guilty about not saving the world as a teacher. I'd love to hear from any of you about how to really approach that guilt in a way that will get, maybe an actionable way that people can approach the guilt that we're feeling in a variety of ways, whether it's in our home, with the people we're dealing with at work, just this overall guilt. Tara?
Yeah, I could talk about one practical technique that I write about in my book, which is sometimes I think our guilt is really coming from our critical voice within us, which I call my frenemy within. Like, I've known her forever, met her middle school. If I met her today, we wouldn't be friends, but we have like a long history, so she's coming over. My frenemy within is so much meaner to me than I would ever be to anybody else. And so one of the ways I combat her is I first acknowledge it. So if you're feeling guilty or these feelings like I should be doing X, acknowledge that that's real. Write it down. Write down all the accusations that this voice has. Like, you're not showing up enough as a teacher. You're not proving to the world your worth. Whatever the inventory of accusations is, write it down. And then what I do is I write a letter in defense of myself. I write, thank you so much, frenemy within, for showing up. I want to tell you that we are in a pandemic, a literal global pandemic, and that I am doing my best, and my best is really a lot. And go through it, and maybe to connect to what Celeste was saying, talk about what you're proud of. Defend yourself. And what I often do is I then take this letter and I post it on my vision board, because yes, I have a vision board, and I put it next to a picture of somebody who I really admire. So maybe I'll put it next to a picture of Cheryl Strayed or Oprah or Nora Ephron, or somebody who I think is a badass who would defend herself, who would take care of herself. And I think that activity of uniting your brain and your hands, like making it really physical and in the real world, gets you out of your head. It gets you out of the guilt spiral and makes it really tangible. So that is how I would kind of deal with that guilt.
I love that. Corinne.
I just wanted to say something about the parent talking about the iPad and the child and the guilt about that. Mm-hmm. One thing is that I'm a parent, and I think that parents can be very hard on themselves. And at this point where you're locked in and everybody is trying to manage children, manage their own emotions, manage everything, you may be working or not working or worrying about money. I think this is not the time to be hard on yourself and to be a perfect mum. It's just impossible. And I think that question really comes from where am I getting the support I need to be a parent? And I think every parent, male, female, whatever, everybody needs to be reaching out and getting some support and getting some help with the issue of how do we get through this. And don't be hard on yourself if you do let your child maybe do things more than you would usually do it. But also remember, you can turn off, you can just get down and, play or do something, or just cuddle on a sofa. And there are times to have quiet times as well as trying to distract a child all the time. But
and our children are going through a pandemic as well. Our children aren't, it's not, working from home and schooling from home is not normal. And so we have to remember and give our children that grace in the same way that we're talking to our younger self. Celeste?
Just two quick things. I know I have to wrap up soon. Number one, it is okay for you to leave your kids to figure out what to do. Boredom is totally healthy. It is a very fertile state of mind. Again, that's where you enter the default mode network. Let them figure out something to do. That is totally 100% okay. The second thing I would do to add on to what Tara said, sometimes I treat my anxieties, if you've read the Harry Potter series, like a boggart, in that the best way to kill them is to laugh at them. So sometimes I will take them to the absolute extreme of like, oh, you feel guilty because you haven't solved COVID yet and your vaccine, where's that, Celeste? So like sometimes I will take my anxieties and I will name them and articulate them. And sometimes just articulating them makes them seem ridiculous. Like by holding these things in our head as sort of vague accusations about us, it makes them way worse than if we actually say, I feel guilty that I'm taking 30 minutes to sit here and watch a rerun of 30 Rock. I mean, that is ridiculous. So again, if you make it ridiculous, what's the spell ridiculous? Sometimes just laughing it away can make you feel a lot better.
Oh, I love that so much. I want to, there's one more question that I wanted to bring up, and it really ties in a lot of what we've been saying, and it gives us kind of a little pivot in the conversation. But someone said that, we're having conversations about how to keep in touch with ourselves, how to keep in touch with our friends and family. But someone's saying, how do they're really interested in caring for and advocating for the world outside of them, seeing these disparities that maybe they weren't aware of, and now they are, and how do they make those connections? And I just want to suggest with that question, one of the things that I teach in my online learning platform called The Great Unlearn, where I'm helping us all go through self-paced unlearning of what has often been taught to us in ridiculous and irrational ways. But I talk about that my equation for learning and for showing up for people as an ally is knowledge plus empathy plus action. We have to have understanding about what people are experiencing from their narrative. And then connecting ourselves to them and saying, well, how do I show up in this space? Saying, what are my privileges and how are my privileges affecting how other people are experiencing the world. And then of course, action, showing up in tangible ways. And so to answer that question, in my mind, I think this is a great time to start learning about people, to really listening to people's narratives, reading stories, reading newspapers, reading things, and trying to figure out what is actually happening and how can I show up. That empathy to say, okay, what do I have that maybe other people are lacking, that I have in excess, and how can I show up for them in these ways? And then taking action, I highly, highly suggest you take your most action in a local way. There's no need to save the world if we all did what we could do for our for our dining room table, for our neighborhood, for our school system. It would have such a huge impact. And so I hope that people can take this time to really read things they wouldn't normally read, watch things they wouldn't normally watch, to see how people are existing outside of their own experience. And my platform, The Great Unlearn, has been a way for us to continuously unlearn what we thought we knew about how we exist in the world. And I'm interested, along with what Celeste said about how she's showing up and she's going out and supporting people by buying groceries. We know that people are lacking access to food. I'd love to hear from either one of you, all of you, what other ways people could, should, might have that opportunity to show up in bigger ways for the world at large. Tara?
Oh yeah, Tara, sorry.
I think to what you were saying, Rachel, that we need to start local, like in your own community. And so one thing I did was just looked around and was like, who needs help? And so I reached out to my temple to see how I could be of service there. And then I realized, my book just came out and the booksellers are all, their businesses are in such danger. So I contacted my local bookstore. I just called them and said, hey, I want to help. How can I help? And we came up with a way to sell my book and also get money for people who can't afford groceries right now. There are lots of ways to help if you ask and if you show up and if you look around your community. Like you were saying, Rachel, this has illuminated so many systems. So instead of looking and saying oh, it's so overwhelming, everything's so messed up, what's one thing in your community that you could be helpful in? And that's how I approached it.
I love that. Thank you. Corinne?
In my household here in London, we've made a whole rota for the street. My daughter's running it at the moment, and we just make sure anybody in the street has got medicine or have got some food. We've been collecting food and passing it around. And the other thing is just check on the older people in the community, to phone them up because they often don't want to open the door, and say and wave through the window. That's the other thing. We go past and wave through the window and just say, hi, how are you? Give people a damn good listening to, which is what I always think people need. And just that sort of human hello, even at 2 meters distance, you can still do that.
I love that. Celeste?
I to add into what Corinne said, the great Celeste Headley once said that hardly anybody waves, that everybody waves back. Meaning that you don't have to wait for someone else to reach out. You be the one that reaches out first. And one way I think that you can really help people feel better is ask people for advice. You're sitting there wondering, you feel disempowered. There's a ton of people around you that know a lot of stuff. And we really rarely ask for advice because oftentimes we think it means people are going to think we don't know. Well, you don't. Of course you don't know everything. Of course we need each other. If there's one tiny fragile silver lining to this pandemic, maybe it's reminding us that we need each other and that the network of humankind is completely interwoven and interdependent. So call people and ask them for advice, ask them for recipes, say, I'm bored, I don't know what to do, what should I do tonight? Ask people where to go to eat, ask them for their wisdom and their help, and it'll make them feel awesome, it'll make them feel listened to, and it'll make you feel better.
I love that. Just listening to and asking to be heard. Those are advocating for ourselves, knowing what we need in a moment and saying, hey, this is what I need, and reaching out to people. I'll also do a shameless plug that if you are looking for a way to support my foundation, the Loveland Foundation, this pandemic is certainly affecting Black women in a very particular way. And if you would love to assist us, the lovelandfoundation.org is where we are doing that very important work. I'm so grateful for all of you. I can't wait to rewatch this and take notes again, just because I had to focus, but I'm excited to take all of the tips. You gave such actionable items, which is, I think, what people are really craving for right now. I thank all of you so much for coming in from all over the country, all over the world. Thank you to Penguin Random House for having us and being part of their Well Enough series. There's more to come, and I'm just so grateful, and I hope everyone feels a little more whole, a little more light, maybe since it's nighttime, a little sleepier, so you can get that rest that we promote and said that we need so much. I'm so grateful. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.